because as usual, I have to say, you know what? I know people have different reasons to dislike people or whatever, but I actually think as a GM, Steve Arhansett, true, he is just playing with like the fucking money printer, like that gif of him or whatever. He does just have like, the chance to buy everyone for the most. But aside from the fact that the deals might not be the best in terms of the amount, he hasn't put many feet wrong in terms of some of the deals he's done the last few years. Like when he signs the big players, they tend to work out. Like not just domestically, they tend to be pretty good teams. So, Dexter, you start on this one. What do you think of the new Team Liquid lineup?
I think it might even be better than Cloud9 this year, just because I think what they've put together is great. And yeah, Steve is known to have spent money, but if you look at it, he's not being put in a position right now where he has to spend $3 million for new support, right? Whenever I talk to people and I tell them, well, imagine if Team Liquid or TSM right now, they dropped to like 6th place suddenly. Now the cost of getting back to that 1st place is significantly higher than having spent a bit more money in the previous years, right? If we assume that the industry moves forward at the pace it does right now, what does it matter if you spend $1 million, like let's say like an arbitrary number, $1 million more right now when you can keep the roster stacked and at the 1st place, right? I think Steve has made very great moves. I think it's probably the best roster he has put together in years. And when I talk to him, he feels the same way. So, yeah, if you have Afari now, you have Jensen, who's being a resident. Core JJ is probably going to be a resident next year. So, in the event that the AD carry or jungle doesn't work out, you can just upgrade it, right? And you have a couple high-profile players in Europe again on the AD or jungle role. Someone like Selfmade comes to my mind. He is off contract next year, right? You can upgrade. That's the thing that Steve has put himself in a position now. He has the 2 most important carries, right? The solo laners. Those are like a very, very great core of the team. You have Core JJ saved for another 3 years, I believe. So you can now like breathe, right? He doesn't have to do much this year to ensure that next year he still has a very, very great team. Whereas if TSM goes really horribly wrong, they have a much, much bigger cost of changing roster, where Steve can just say, you know what, I have a great roster, I have the great core pieces, they are costing me that much money, but next year I can probably import another player if I feel that I need to upgrade more. And depending on how they do this year, I would assume that based on how they perform at Worlds and where they place, that Steve gets a bit more budget from his bosses to spend even more money next year, right? So when I look at these rosters, I always look, okay, what can you accomplish this year? And not only this year, but how is it going to look in like 2 or 3 years? It's really important to look very forward to like the next years. Whereas fans most of the time always say, okay, this is the roster we have this year. Now you're going to put yourself in a position where you have to carefully craft these rosters together and then look at 2 or 3 years already when you put it down. So I think he's probably in by far the best position than any other North American team. And there's a lot less downside to it. I would assume that, yeah. And then Alfari is a young player. He's going to probably stay there for like 3 years. He's going to sit out his contract. Jensen is re-signed. And to me, it's the best team, at least right now in North America. We will see how how C9 develops, but yeah, I think Steve has put together the best roster of anyone probably.
What do you think, Rich?
So my big question mark about this team, to me, actually, it's not really that much of a question mark. Unfortunately, I think this team is fairly hard capped by jungle. I think that first of all, and I don't say this to be nice, whatever, but Santorin is like a super nice guy, and the reason why I say that is because he's very amicable. He's so easy to work with. It's guaranteed he's going to get along with his teammates, and everyone on the team is going to love him. But that in itself can be a problem because obviously, when tough decisions need to be made or things need to be changed or whatever. I know that one of them, when during the off season, Jensen was trying to shop himself with Santorin for like a long time. They wanted to play together, and I do wonder how much of that is based on what I could imagine is a really great friendship versus how much sense does this actually make. I've worked with Santorin closely. I really like the guy. I find him in game to be incredibly hesitant, incredibly passive. And right now in this meta, it's not too bad actually, because it's very farming based still for the jungler, so you can kind of just chill and farm in your jungle for 10 minutes and not have to do too much. So for this specific meta, maybe it makes sense. I do worry when the meta starts to shift and things start to turn and he's, there's going to be more emphasis on maybe early ganking and being aggressive, that he's going to cap this team. And the reason why I have issue with this move in the context of this roster is because, again, if you go out and spend the money that they spent on Alfari, which I think, in a vacuum, great signing, obviously. To me, it doesn't make sense to go with Santorin. On paper, obviously, there's much more elements to it. I'd have loved to have seen Dardok back on Team Liquid, because I think then you've got Jensen, who is one of the most skilled mid laners in the region for sure. Alfari, who in my opinion is the best Western top laner. And when I say Western, I mean playing in the West as well. So I include Someday in that discussion also. I think he's just the best top laner. And you've Core JJ, who is top 3 Western support for sure. And Tactical, who I don't have as much faith in, but he's fine, right? I think if you had a top tier jungler here, someone like a Selfmade, who obviously I'm not saying they could or would have signed, but just someone who, as the meta goes along, is going to be able to make early plays when needed more reliably. I'd have liked to have seen someone fit in there who could have done that, because honestly, as much as I like the guy, I don't have much faith in Santorin, and I think Santorin basically took advantage last year of a very weak jungle pool in North America. So yeah, I actually prefer Cloud9, just because I think obviously jungle's a very important position as well, and if we do see that shift at all, I think Blabber's going to be someone who I would much rather have on my team trying to make plays in the mid lane with a perks than, as good as Jensen is, having Santorin being his partner in crime for that. I just prefer that situation. Obviously, someone like Alfari, I assume, is going to be massively outperforming someone like Fudge, if I had to guess. But top lane's just a far less important role right now. So it really doesn't matter as much to me as the sort of mid-jungle position. So for me, actually, I prefer Cloud9 right now. And I also think there's a bit of an ADC gap there as well, even though I obviously prefer Core JJ over Vulcan.
Do you have any thoughts on Santorin, Dexter?
I think he was just the only choice that made sense. I mean, yeah, you could have made the argument for Dardok, but based on history, I don't think that was truly like a viable option for someone like Steve. So you couldn't import another jungler. So I think he was the only one that made sense right from the get-go. So even if you would have liked to have a stronger jungler, I think you probably have to wait another year to get a truly like elite jungler that outperforms. So I personally don't have a problem with him being in that roster, because I think just on paper, it was the best choice they could have gotten, I think, in my eyes at least.
So I have 2 short points to make on this. One is that one is born out of complete ignorance, because I have no idea what like the academy pool of junglers is or whatever. But regardless of who I signed for jungler, and with these kind of players, I probably would look to sign an experienced jungler. So I guess if you're picking between Santorin and a rookie or something, then I would have Santorin starting. I would make sure, however, that when I'm putting the level of investment I'm putting into this roster, that I'm signing a really promising young jungler who may not be, completely ready to take on the world right now, but to play behind Santorin. I think there's been a big mistake made if their academy jungler is not someone that they believe can be good, because then you're essentially telling me that Santorin's going to be your jungler come wind or rain this season, and I don't like that at all. Also, I don't know what the messaging was around this roster. If, Steve came out and said, we're really going to make a push for the world title or not. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was much more sort of reserved. But if there were any aspirations to do well internationally, to me, you go with Dardok. Like, I'm not, again, he's got a whole baggage worth of problems, right? But no one can convince me that this Team Liquid lineup's going to do anything with that jungler. I'm sorry. Like, unless the meta just stays completely where it is and he's able to just power farm, and play like Ivan and these kind of picks, it's like super late every game. I just don't believe that this lineup can do anything internationally, because I think jungle is a position where the West does get really exposed against the East if you don't have one of those S tier players.
Yes, that's the problem to me, is basically, I agree with your premise basically, which is especially like the last split that he played, it just meant he got overvalued because people were like, he's the best jungler. Now, in the context of that split, he was among them, certainly. Like, Closer was on a fucking bad team. Who else? Svenskaren's EG team just fell apart. What else do we have? Who else do we even have? Obviously, Blabber had his issues in Cloud. Like, yeah, everyone else sort of disqualified themselves by different factors that had nothing to do with play, or just was only them playing badly. So, in my opinion, Santorin's a player where, for the LCS, he can certainly have a long career. He can at least be an average jungler. At his best, he's only going to be above average, though. I agree. I don't think he can be an S-tier player. So, for example, God forbid you get to Worlds and it was the kind of meta it was this last Worlds where like the junglers were the fucking like MVPs. It became over. Like you aren't going to win against some like Canyon level motherfucker with someone like Santorin. Sorry. With that said though, I definitely think you're onto something with the Jensen angle. Because when I looked at this team and the way it's made, this looks like Jensen. It's just like it's his fucking birthday party now. He's the 14-year-old girl who gets everything his way. He's like, right, so I've got Alfari, guy's pretty quiet and just super self-sufficient top lane. Cool. Jungler doesn't need to go there. And fucking guys that AD carries still borderline lucky. Cool. And he'll be kept in line by the Korean. You know what? Why don't I get myself a new fucking bottler? Right, Santorin. See, now you played for PoE, mate. Do it like that for me. Do everything I want. Play my lane 24/7. Like, I can understand selfishly if I'm the mid lane. Of course I ask for that. I actually think that's an area where teams, maybe this will be a good side tangent. One of the areas that kills me is even though, contrasted to my native game of CSGO, the actual amount of power that players have isn't actually as big. Like in CSGO, you can just wreck the whole lineup if you're the star player or the veteran, you know, you can choose who joins, who doesn't. Like, you can sort of block a lot of like business moves, because even when actually the business has you under like your balls in a vice because they've got a contract, it's not a bit, unfortunately, like the PR can be so bad if your fans get turned against you by those same players, that generally a lot of the players do get a massive amount of say in who joins, who leaves, etc. But in League of Legends, normally that isn't the case too much. It's like a bit like that. But this looks to me like potentially someone's overstepped their bounds. Because what I want is, listen, obviously I want my mid laner to some degree to have self-interest and to be like, well, I want the player to play for me. The problem is though, that should then be naturally counteracted by a GM who has a strong position, other players who have their own thoughts. And the idea is, if we're all acting in self-interest, it should like even out in some fucked up sort of like, that's almost like some sort of ANCAP logic of like, you know, how like libertarian society would work. But as a premise, this team to me looks a little bit too much like Jensen or Bust, you know, which, listen, he's a very good player. Maybe he can do it, but it's a bit tough. Like, because I also agree on the Alfari angle. It's like, if I'm getting Alfari, don't I want... Listen, I've just got the two best solo laners. Don't I want some jungler who's just going to make these guys just blow off the entire map? That's not really Santorin's game for me.
Yeah, I think that this is an area where you can actually balance the team with the pieces you have versus like a TSM situation where there's nothing that meshes or makes any sense at all. You can actually have, for example, core JJ with a not especially great AD carry if you have a really good jungler. In this team, it works because Alfari's applying so much pressure in the top lane, you would assume. Jensen's always going to be applying a decent amount of pressure in most matchups in the mid lane. So it gives the bot lane so much more breathing space. You don't need a star AD carry in this situation. So you're creating a much more space for core JJ to roam and make plays. And you're also giving the enemy like so many problems when they have to worry about Alfari maybe getting jungle help or just pushing on his own, so detracting attention from our jungler, or the jungler playing towards Jensen, right, who's one of the best mid laners in the region, if not the best mid laner in the region. So I think having a good jungler here would have been, even like a raw playmaking jungler, even if he wasn't some great all-round player, and I guess this is why I kind of think to Dardoch as like the only obvious guy right now, right? If I just have like a really good aggressive mechanical player who might not have it all figured out, maybe he's not the best decision maker come late game around Barons and blah blah blah, I really don't feel that badly about that situation as long as he's able to play aggressively around either my mid lane or my top laner or both, right? And then the bot lane is going to be so much more self-sufficient where I've got two lanes which are generally going to be shoving. So for me, Santorin, who I imagine is going to be spending the vast majority of his time in his jungle. And also you have to take into account player tendencies as well, right? It's not just about what you're doing or not doing. Fog of War's a thing, and you're going to play towards players' tendencies. If you have Jensen in the mid lane, Alfari in the top lane, and a Dardoch-like character running around the jungle, you're going to be so much more apprehensive about making plays.
Sure.
If I'm the enemy jungler and I'm playing against Santorin, if it's the first 5 minutes of the game, I feel really good about ganking top because Alfari's pushed it and Santorin not showing up 2 seconds later. I feel so much better about that than I would if Dardoch was there, for example. Again, I'm not saying Dardoch was the answer, but I really hope for Team Liquid's sake.
Stylistically, though, yes, I see what you mean.
Yeah, that they do have like some good mechanical, aggressive player, or just, you know, a really promising young jungler in their academy team, because if they don't, I think this team's very capped.
The one angle, actually, and I think Dexter nailed it earlier, that I get the Santorin moving in terms of like this could be the big upside, is that obviously he is an NA resident, and as we said, like, you know, you can't pick another import for this lineup. But in the world where you have potentially you want to upgrade the AD carry in the future, like this could one day be the team in a year or two that is the all import team. It could be the first one that ever did it, and it could even be good. Like, imagine this sort of a team if you I mean, think about how many good AD carries we have in Europe now. We have more than the 3 for the top 3 teams. So inevitably in a year or two, one of them is going to be available, if not more people coming through now. So that could be a Kazi, an upset patch. There's a whole bunch of angles. Like, that is sort of whacking as much as like when you have a team like Team Liquid, you're supposed to win now. But at the same time, in a sense of like, if it goes wrong, my hedge is pretty good. Like, my out is pretty good as well if I don't end up doing this move, as opposed to like the TSM example we said, where if it fails, you sort of just fuck the whole lineup and you have to pretty much start over. Yeah, I also will say this as well, just as a little preview for all the TSM fans out there to really trigger them when they watch this season, because obviously their fucking team's not winning LCS. I'll just tell you right now, listen, I can already, just as like an intellectual exercise, explain why like maybe Jensen was better than Bjergsen, right? But I tell you what, if he stacks a couple more LCS championships combined with the international mismatch like a motherfucker, by the way, I'm going to go straight out. I'll just do a full article. It'll be like, like 4,000 word article. And I'll just basically like, at the end, it'll be like QED. He's better than Bjergsen. At this point in time, Bjergsen will just be sat there like, fuck, I could have played 2 more years. It's like, no, tough for you. You enjoy being a fucking 7th best coach. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm already setting that up for myself. Like, it's going to be my hook to just watch the season, basically.